All right, guys, so we're going to be taking a look at some of the Prime Day deals going on right now, specifically for mini PCs. What I'm really seeing is that a lot of the deals are on the lower end of the hardware, but there are some crazy deals to be found as well. Now, just like any Prime Day, a lot of these discounts aren't really that discounted from what the normal prices actually are. For example, like the Beelink S12 Pro that you see here, its normal price is never $199. It's pretty much always around the $170 range, so really we're looking at more like a $10 discount here. And while you might be tempted to go with these, I mean, just looking at the amount that have been sold in the last month, this is an extremely popular product, and you might be tempted to pick up one of these, but I am going to try to dissuade you from buying this because there are some better deals to be had. Scrolling down immediately, we end up seeing an Ace Magic system here. Ace Magic has a troubled history with people, but for the most part, every system that I have taken a look at from them has been functional. I really haven't personally run into issues, but in general, this deal isn't all that remarkable. I mean, it's a 5800U, so I've used this chassis before, and I can tell you that this chassis does not allow you to really utilize higher TDPs. So while that price point might seem tempting, it's not exactly a great value, especially since we only have 16 gigabytes of RAM included here. The 512 gigabyte SSD is pretty standard across the board. One of the biggest selling points of this system in particular is the fact that you get the dual gigabit LAN, although in this specific case it is 1 gigabit and one 2.5 gigabit, but you end up sacrificing some IO just to achieve that, and overall this is not a chassis that I was that big of a fan of. This might seem like a crazy deal also, but I'm telling you, if I can barely recommend the N95, the N97 and the N100, an N5105 is just way too cut down. That is a really deep discount, but honestly, you could find better results for not that much more. And again, the biggest deals that we're really seeing is in these Celeron processors, but really it's once we start to get into the $200 to $300 price point that things become a lot more interesting. This system in particular right here is one that I think you should really consider. Here's why. We're looking at a Ryzen 5 6600H. This is a chip that has been pretty rare to see in the mini PC market, especially coming down into these price points. Immediately, one of the downsides of this specific configuration is the fact that we are only looking at 16 gigabytes of RAM. But considering the fact that what we're actually getting here is a Zen 3 Plus processor and the 6600M iGPU, that pretty much means that we are getting better GPU performance than any 5000 series APU on the market. This puts us on RDNA 2, which means that this is actually still receiving driver updates. So if gaming is something that you really want out of a mini PC, this right now is pretty much one of the best deals on the market because you are actually getting on a platform that is still receiving updates, that is going to get you better performance, and that Ryzen 5 6600H is still going to be able to keep up. It's essentially just a 5600H, so there is no mini PC that is going to give you better single core performance than this at this price point, that is also going to have a GPU that is this good. This is a really balanced system. The biggest downside is only having 16 gigabytes of RAM, but you can also upgrade this pretty easily. And if all you're concerned about is gaming, 16 gigabytes will be perfectly fine, and it is easily upgradable. And when we look at what is around it in these price points, we're looking at still Ryzen 7s, but that are Zen 2 or Zen 3 based. So it really stands out as an absolutely great deal right now. Now, there are Intel chips that are starting to get into some interesting price points, but keep in mind that currently there are a lot of rumors and discussions being had about the fact that Intel processors are seemingly degrading at a very fast rate. And at least some of the developers that have spoken up about this are confirming that this is also happening with Intel mobile processors. So this this isn't something that you can avoid by just going with a mini PC instead of a desktop. If it is 13th gen or 14th gen, it is likely to run into issues. Now, thankfully, systems like this are actually using 12th gen, which so far has really had no reports of any of these degradation issues. So systems like these actually do seem like a pretty rock solid value if CPU performance is something that you really care about, because this is going to have better IPC than any of these systems over here. The single core performance is going to be noticeably better, but keep in mind that that core configuration means that we actually have a very limited amount of cores that are actually high performance. Look at the specific Intel chip. We're looking at 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. That's why we end up with 12 threads, because the efficiency cores don't actually have hyper-threading. Still, 4 performance cores is going to be more than enough for most tasks out there. If you're looking to host game servers or anything like that, they're always going to be just single-threaded anyway, so 4 performance cores is more than adequate, and this is a really nice value here. And in particular, I am a fan of this GMK Tech case. So far, GMK Tech has been showing some really nice value for their systems on this Prime Day sale, so it's really nice to see. Again, Ace Magic here has some discounts on their systems. This is 11th gen, so if anything, this is a more viable option than anything 13th gen or 14th gen. But look at that price point. You are getting an i9 that is multiple generations old, only 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD for $360. When again, this right here, the GPU on this, the iGPU, is going to clear this thing so disastrously that there is really no point in picking this up, or really this system at all. Even with that discount, it does bring it down to a reasonable level, but again, why get a 5800U when you can just get a 6600H? Unless you really need CPU performance, this is going to be a better value. Now, another interesting Prime Day system is the Beelink Acer 6 2024 edition. This is rocking the Ryzen 9 6900HX, and that means it comes with the Radeon 680M that has the highest possible clock speed that we've seen so far, which is 2400 megahertz. Pair that with 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD, and overall, this is a really nice package at the sub $500 price point. This gets you on RDNA 2, which means you are now getting driver updates. If gaming is really important to you, this is pretty much necessary. That 32 gigabytes of RAM means that you can be a lot more flexible with how much RAM you allocate to your system if that's something you want to do. And that 1 terabyte SSD is pretty much what I consider to be the bare minimum for actual proper usability with just how large games are nowadays. 512 gigabytes is pretty much just the bare minimum acceptable amount, but really 1 terabyte is where you should really be aiming for if you actually plan on using this system for things like gaming. But this price point, this is actually a really great value, and really one of the systems that I would be eyeballing to pick up. I will say that the Boss Game P100 over here is a pretty great value at this price point here, where it is just $300, because you get the 5700U, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a 1 terabyte SSD. While most other systems at this price point are really looking at 16 gigabytes of RAM and 500 gigabyte SSDs, this is at least a pretty nice value, especially since you get the 2.5 gigabit LAN here. If you're looking to set up a game storage NAS or anything like that, if you have multiple people that use Steam in your house or anything like that, these are really great because you get this set up in your network with 2.5 gig, and you're able to transfer games over the network at 2.5 gigabit speeds, no problem, to multiple people. That 5700U still holds up in the modern day if all you're doing is day-to-day tasks and hosting servers and stuff like that. And as the title here even describes, PS3 emulation, don't get too aggressive with that. It is essentially just telling you it will run, it just won't be a great experience. If you want to do PS3 emulation properly, I would really try to get on RDNA, whether 2 or 3. But this is still a very nice performer for emulation. And again, the 1 terabyte SSD and 32 gigabytes of RAM make this a lot more compelling of a deal here. Of course, the best overall computer that I would recommend that you get instead of any of these really cheap systems with the N100 or anything like that, I would beg you, please avoid getting one of those and instead pick up the Beelink Sur 5 with the Ryzen 5 at 5560U. And to really sell you on why, let me just tell you about my experience with using the Beelink S12 Pro. This is hands down the most used mini PC in my entire household. It is the mini PC that was in the living room for the last about year and a half. And in that time, it was used for media streaming because we watch a lot of things on Plex here, a lot of YouTube watching, and really just general web browsing, since the living room computer is kind of where we'll just Google things if we're just talking about getting anything and we want to be able to easily share it with everybody in the room. And at those things, it did do a really great job. But things ended up changing once we actually ended up upgrading our security camera system away from those systems that are very closed source systems where the camera needs a proprietary app and it seems to give access to anyone you might not want to get access to your network, whether it is a foreign government or even your own police department getting full unfiltered access to your security network because a company deemed that so. Personally, I don't like the idea of just a company deciding who gets access to my network like that. So we switched to a completely DIY camera system, and at the heart of all of this is Blue Iris, a very popular software for managing your own personal collection of security cameras. And this system immediately ended up falling apart when it came to doing that task. Because see, it could handle running Blue Iris in the background. But once you try to do anything else, like say watch some YouTube, but while you have the Blue Iris security system running on a second monitor, suddenly there are stutters, suddenly there's buffering happening, suddenly the security cameras start to glitch out a little bit. And I look at what is happening and the CPU and GPU in this thing are at 100% load. It is just too much work for a 4-core processor without hyperthreading. And so after a year and a half of really decent results out of this thing, what I ended up doing was I just grabbed the second one of these units that I had actually purchased, because I was trying to see if there was any difference between the original version that I bought of this and the new one, and effectively there wasn't any. So my original plan was to just return it since there was really no purpose for it, but this situation ended up coming up, and after replacing it, this has been doing a rock solid job at running Blue Iris and doing everything else that we would do on the system. But this time around, the CPU is not running at 100%. The GPU is not running at 100%. We went from 4 cores without hyperthreading to 6 cores with 12 threads in total to work with. And how much more are we really spending here? We're looking at a less than $100 difference. And it is night and day the level of performance that I got out of this thing. And I know you might be thinking right now, well, whatever tasks I want to do will run perfectly fine on this. Do I really want to spend more if I can just get this kind of a deal? And fair enough, if you think that that is the judgment call for you, by all means go for it. But I really, really recommend that you just go with this, because it's unlikely that you'll run into a scenario where this won't be enough. But it's very likely that eventually you will run into a scenario where this won't be enough. And you cannot upgrade this. If the N100 is not capable of doing the task, you're kind of just stuck there. So why put yourself into that situation where you are now left considering an upgrade anyway, when you can just pick this up and avoid that entire scenario? This is the pick. This is the go-to for practically anyone. If you're considering this, just really, really think about what you're trying to do here, because I can promise you that this will do what that can do, just better. And I know you might also be thinking, well, if I'm spending this much, why don't I just consider this, or that? No. This is it. This is all you're going to need. This is the bare minimum, and you really don't have to go further than this unless you specifically want gaming. If you specifically are looking to do heavy tasks on a mini PC. But if you want a day-to-day system that will just do everything that you want it to, this is Don't look at the N100. Don't look at the N95. Don't look at the N97. Look at this and only this. Now, another deal that I do want to point out is two particular ones. These two right here. This one I'm pointing out specifically because of the fact that you're looking at the 7940HS, which we recently took a look at, and it is still to this day the best performing APU that AMD has on the mini PC market right now. And this comes with 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. This is a crazy value at this price point. You can get the system cheaper if you want to go bare bones and stuff like that, and at $400, that's still a great deal because you can just throw whatever memory that you can get your hands on in there. There's also, of course, the 1 terabyte and 32 gigabyte version, but at the price point that they're selling at, the 64 gigabytes becomes a lot more compelling, particularly because, at least for me, what I have found is that these APUs can do a lot of the work that I want to get done. It's the RAM that is the limiting factor, and even 32 gigabytes of RAM has proven to be kind of an issue sometimes loading up a lot of 4K footage. 64 gigabytes of RAM though, well, that makes a completely different scenario here. Now you have so much memory to work with, and at this price point, it's really not that bad of a purchase at all. Like, if you're looking for a mini PC to actually get work done and you know that you have a workload with a lot of memory, this is pretty much it. Because again, right now, Intel 13th gen is just not a viable option on mobile. There are degradation issues that are showing up with those i9s. So if you are someone that is actually trying to do work, is actually trying to get things done, look only towards this. Do not look at Intel right now. Unless you could find a decent price on a 12th gen i9, I would just avoid 13th gen. Just completely avoid it. Go with AMD. That being said, again, 12th gen from Intel is perfectly usable, and this system right here is actually a really nice value. We look up the i5-12600H. Again, we end up with 4 performance cores, but we end up doubling the amount of E cores that we have here. So if you have multi-threaded tasks, if you're looking to try to render things out, this is a really nice value, especially since you get 32 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. Plus, those 2.5 gigabit LAN ports do make this a compelling option if you're trying to set up a home server. But these actually do a great job because Intel and their 12th gen is really performant in terms of single core performance. These systems are really great if you're trying to do any kind of graphic design. Things like Photoshop, Illustrator, Lightroom, and things like that all end up being very single threaded. And because of that, they actually run really, really well on these Intel systems. So if you're someone that's just looking to try to edit any kind of content like that, this is actually a really great value. I, in particular, really, really like this. You get 32 gigabytes of RAM, which I think is just really great for that because you can get really effects heavy, very layer heavy. And the CPU is also going to keep up because a lot of this software really is very single threaded. So again, that CPU is going to give you a great result. And at this price point, it's a really, really nice value for that kind of case. I have scoured through a bunch of the different pages here trying to find any other deals, and really the ones that I've shown you so far are kind of the best ones. I will say avoid the 16 gigabyte trap here. I know it's tempting. You see the sub $400 price and you think, oh man, this is such a great deal. But trust me, 16 gigabytes with a Ryzen 9 like this is just not a great combo. Go with 32 gigabytes. It gives you way more flexibility for your iGPU. It's one of those things where if you get the 16 gigabytes, you're going to end up upgrading it down the line anyway. So just get 32 and save yourself the hassle. That being said, if you do want the vast majority of the performance of the 7940HS, you could just get the 7840HS here. This is a 32 gigabyte configuration with a 1 terabyte SSD, and at least for me, it has a 5% coupon, so that this actually ends up being a pretty reasonable deal. Again, RDNA 2 based iGPUs are starting to get down there in price, so you might be tempted looking at the $400 price range. But if you want pretty much the best of the best, this is where it's at. And at this price point, it's not a absolute ripoff, so overall pretty decent. But I would look at RDNA 2 if you want to get the best deal. Now, if you're going to ignore my advice and get a B-Link S12 Pro anyway, at least check out the Amazon affiliate links down below so you can help me out with that and let me know why specifically you are picking it up, because I of course have my personal experience with it and my use case, but I want to know how it differs for you and why you would choose it. I mean, it's not a bad option. Again, as I said, I used this system for a year and a half daily, perfectly fine. It really wasn't until our use case changed that it just was not enough. But if you feel confident that what you are going to use this thing for is going to function with this perfectly adequately, and you think that that is a great deal, of course, by all means go for it. And again, check out those Amazon affiliate links down below. I hope you found these thoughts on some of these deals interesting or useful. Let me know what system in particular you have picked up, because I am very curious to see what you guys have been looking for Prime Day. I'll catch you guys in the next one.